Hi everyone, it's Sandy, and today I'm filming my October wrap-up, which means that I'll be talking about all the books that I read in October. I did end up reading 5 books, and I feel like 5 is the average number of books that I've been reading per month lately. It's definitely not as much as I used to read, but I'm still happy that I'm able to fit reading into my schedule. I would say that I started off the month great because not only did I travel to LA at the beginning of the month, but I read Crier's Ware by Nina Varela, and I'm going to say right off the bat that I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars. I did film an LA travel vlog and I briefly talked about this book, so if you're curious in hearing more of my thoughts and also following along my adventures in LA, then I'll have that video linked below. But anyways, back to the story. So this is a YA fantasy debut taking place in a world where there are mechanical beings, which are essentially androids with artificial intelligence. These androids are called Autome, and they're basically built and created to look and act like humans. So this story follows 2 main characters. The first character is Crier. She's an Automa, and she is the daughter to the Sovereign, who is also an Automa. The second main character that we follow is Ayla, and she's human, and she has definitely been through a lot. She essentially wants to bring down the Autome because of what they've done to her family and all that she's lost because of them. So this story follows these 2 characters as their lives become entangled with one another, but there's also a slow-burning enemies to lover relationship between Crier and Ayla, and this book is just fantastic. I do want to say thank you to Harper Teen and Wonderkind PR for sending me a copy of this book in exchange for an honest review. I really love this book. This was the type of story that I didn't want to put down because I constantly wanted to read about Crier and Ayla and be completely immersed in the world they lived in. I thought the dynamic between the Autome and humans were really fascinating because rather than the humans being in power, it is the Autome. It's really interesting to learn about the history of the world and how the Autome came into power. The instant that Crier and Ayla met, I was immediately rooting for them. I love both of the characters together and individually. I loved seeing their interactions, and I was very curious to see their relationship develop, especially considering the fact that Ayla hates the Autome for what they've done to her family. The enemies to lover romance is the perfect amount of slow burning. It's captivating and filled with angst, and I loved every second of it. I love that the story was told in both of their point of views, which allows the author to reveal bits and pieces of each of the characters' feelings for the other character, while also revealing information about rebellions, politics, and secrets, and this was such a good story. There's this overall theme of what it means to be human, and then themes of oppression and privilege that is woven throughout the whole novel, and I really liked how the author did that. While the world of Crier's Ware is different than our own, there's still a lot of similarities that the author pulls from, and it was really interesting to read about. So like I mentioned earlier, I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars, and I would highly recommend it. The next book that I finished is Butterfly Yellow by Thannha. I was also sent this book by Harper Teen and Wonderkind, so I wanted to thank them for sending this copy to me in exchange for an honest review. The beginning of the story is during the final days of the Vietnam War, and the main character is at the airport with her younger brother, and she is determined to find a way for them to head to America together. However, her brother is mistaken to be an orphan, and he's essentially taken from her, and they're separated. And in the present day, it's 6 years later, the main character is now living in Texas, and she is reunited with her brother. However, her brother has no recollection of his experience in Vietnam and doesn't even know who the main character is. I do want to give trigger warnings for PTSD, war, death of loved ones, and family separation. I do think stories about the Vietnam War and the aftermath of it and its impact is very important. I was definitely looking forward to reading this book. Unfortunately, I did not enjoy this book as much as I wanted to. This is a pretty short book. It's under 300 pages, and I did get through it pretty quickly. However, I felt like not a lot was happening in the story. The story doesn't really have much of a plot. The story focuses on the main character trying to rebuild this relationship with her brother, who has no idea who she is. Once she finds her brother, she does spend a lot of time just simply observing and watching him, which from an outside point of view seems pretty creepy, but at the same time, I do respect her trying to give her brother space and not completely overwhelming him with this information about his past. The main character, Hung, she doesn't speak English, and so throughout the novel, she speaks broken English, but it's written as if it's Vietnamese with the accents and everything, but she's actually speaking English. It does make it difficult to understand what she's saying, but I think it does show how difficult it was for her to navigate a world where other people don't speak her own language. So going into this novel, I was surprised to see that there is a second point of view in the story, and that follows Leroy, who is your typical cowboy wannabe, and I just did not care for his character at all. If I could describe his character, he's the type of character who's just conveniently there to help the main character, but other than that, I just didn't care about his character. I did appreciate what he did to help the main character, but whenever I got to chapters in his point of view, I just wanted to skim through it. A good chunk of the middle portion of the story is just these two characters working on a ranch and the main character creeping on her brother, and I just wish there was something more to the story to keep me engaged. As the story goes on, we do get snippets of the awful things that the main character has experienced, and it was very, very heartbreaking to read about. Rather than having Leroy's perspective, I wish the story had the brother's perspective instead. The main plot of the story is the main character reuniting with her brother, but he rarely has a role in the book. He's mostly there going about his business while the main character is observing him. He doesn't have a lot of speaking parts in the book, and so because he doesn't have as huge of a role as Leroy, I just felt very disconnected and distant from the brother's character, and I wish the author fleshed out more about how he was feeling about his sister's sudden appearance. Overall, the story and the characters felt very stable, like they were just kind of going on a straight line and nothing was really changing. So if I had to rate this book, I would give it a 2.5 out of 5 stars, but I definitely don't want to discourage anyone from not picking this book up. I do think it's an important story and I do wish I enjoyed it more, but unfortunately I didn't. The next book that I finished is The Death of Mrs. Westaway by Ruth Ware. This is my first Ruth Ware book. This story follows Harriet Westaway, who goes by Hal. Her mother was a tarot card reader and she passed away a couple years ago, and so Hal basically inherited her mother's business and she's now a tarot card reader herself. She's also in a lot of debt, and one day she receives this mysterious letter from a person known as Mrs. Westaway, who is supposedly her grandmother. Mrs. Westaway has just passed away and Hal was mentioned in the will. Hal believes that this is a mistake. There's no way that she could be related to this Mrs. Westaway. However, because she's in a lot of debt, she wants to kind of check out the situation and the story goes from there. I do want to give trigger warnings for harassment, physical abuse, loss of a loved one, and murder. If I could sum up this book in 2 words, I would say that it's so slow. I was very, very close to DNFing this book because the beginning half of the story was so boring. Once I hit the halfway point, that's when things started to pick up a little bit more, and I was like, okay, now I need to know how the story ends and Hal's relationship to everyone. So when Hal travels to Mrs. Westaway's estate, she is introduced to her sons, and if she is supposedly the granddaughter to Mrs. Westaway, then these sons are supposedly her uncles. And all these uncles just felt very flat. I was confusing them for one another. There's clearly family drama involved in the story, and I felt like the story focused more on the family drama than the actual mystery. The family drama is part of the mystery, but overall the story just didn't really have much of a mystery vibe to it. It does have that eerie atmosphere that most mystery books do have, and I felt like the mystery didn't really come up to maybe the last 1/3 of the story. When things were revealed, it definitely took a couple of minutes for me to process because I was really confused, but overall I just felt like the ending was rushed and I wanted more closure. We just never got it. It just kind of ends, and that was a little bit disappointing. I gave this a 2.5 out of 5 stars. It definitely wasn't a great start to Ruth Ware's books, but I recently heard that her newest one was really great, so I do want to give this author a second chance and I hope to have that book checked out from the library really soon. The next book that I finished in October is The Downstairs Girl by Stacey Lee, and actually listened to this as an audiobook. This is a historical fiction book following a Chinese main character named Jo Kwan, and she is living in Atlanta working as a lady's maid to one of the wealthiest men in the city. However, Jo has also recently become the author of this newspaper advice column, and she goes by the name Miss Sweetie. No one knows who's actually behind Miss Sweetie, but this advice column has gotten the newspaper a lot of attention and Miss Sweetie has become pretty popular. Miss Sweetie challenges a lot of issues regarding race and gender, and I love Jo. I thought she was a fantastic character. Historical fiction really isn't a genre that I reach for, but whenever Stacey Lee has a new book out, I always want to pick it up because I've always loved the characters that she creates, and I also believe that the narrator for her books have always been pretty consistent, so it's like the same narrator, or at least the same narrator for most of her books, and I think that narrator is great. So if you're interested in checking out a Stacey Lee book, I would recommend the audiobook. I love seeing snippets of the advice column. I love Miss Sweetie because she is witty and sassy and I love her, but I really love reading from Jo's point of view. She's basically one of the very, very few Chinese people living in Atlanta, and obviously racism is very prevalent during this time period, and obviously Jo's not white, but she's also not black either, so it was really interesting to read from her point of view and seeing her trying to navigate all of the discriminatory policies that were in place. I also really like how the author addresses the white feminism in the story. There are definitely a lot of middle-class white women that are fighting for women's right to vote, and unfortunately black people and obviously Jo herself are excluded from the conversation. And even though they were excluded, it was still very empowering to see them trying to step up and trying to have their voice heard. Overall, I really enjoy this story. I love Jo's character, and I would give this a 4 out of 5 stars. And if you're the type of reader that's not into historical fiction, I would definitely recommend checking a Stacey Lee book out. Another favorite of mine is called Outrun the Moon, and that was great. So definitely check out this author if you're trying to get into historical fiction. And the very last book that I read in October, which is also a book that I finished on the very last day of the month, so I'm very happy about that. And that book is The Gilded Woes by Roshani Chokshi. If you haven't seen my recent video, I did the try a chapter tag, and spoiler alert, I chose this book as the book that I wanted to pick up next. So here I am talking about this book in my wrap up. This is a story that takes place in 1889. It's set in Paris, and it follows a group of characters, and they basically go on this mission to seek down this ancient artifact. And obviously along the ways there are many obstacles and challenges that they face. This story has been compared to Six of Crows, but I would say definitely don't go into the story expecting it to be just like Six of Crows. It seems that a lot of people go into this book thinking that and then end up being really disappointed. So I definitely didn't expect Six of Crows level greatness from the story, and I ended up really enjoying it. I know this book has a lot of mixed reviews, and I wasn't a fan of the author's debut book, so I was hesitant to go into the story, but this was a story that I knew I would probably enjoy a lot more than the author's first book, and I can happily say that I really enjoyed it. First off, I love these characters. I love their group dynamic, and what makes this group of characters kind of different from Six of Crows is that in Six of Crows, all of the characters that come together are essentially strangers at the beginning, but in this book, these characters have already been working together for a while now. So at the beginning of the story, you can clearly tell that they obviously already have this relationship and group dynamic to one another, and I really love seeing how these characters cared for one another. These characters are also hella diverse. We have a character who's half Filipino, we have a character who's on the autism spectrum, is Jewish, we have an Indian main character, we have a black main character, and we also have characters who are in the LGBT plus community, and I just love the diversity in the story. When I think of these characters, I don't just think like, oh, they're just, you know, working together and that's that. I really do see them as family, and I just loved each and every single one of them. While there are like 6 main characters, this book is told in 4 different point of views, and every time I reached a point of view, there really wasn't a character that I was like, I don't want to read from this character's point of view. I was genuinely excited to read from each character's point of view. A friendship that really stuck out to me is Layla and Zofia. They are the only 2 girls in this group, and Zofia is the character who I believe is on the autism spectrum, and Layla is one of the most considerate characters. I love all the little things that she would do to make Zofia feel comfortable and safe. I could go on about these characters all day, but I guess I do have to end it with saying that I love these characters and I would die for them. So if that doesn't show how much I love these characters, then I don't know what will. And there's also magic in the story. I do have to say the magic can be a little confusing at times, but it didn't bother me too much. So that's why I didn't give it a full 5 out of 5 stars, but I loved the characters. I love the plot. It's very action-packed. I love the pacing of the story. I never really felt bored reading it. So overall, I would give this a 4 out of 5 stars. So those are all the books that I read in October. If you read any of these books, please let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Bye!